It is now 6 p.m. We are starting officially the open house for the fire station location project. My name is Sherry Shoquist. I'm the Housing and Economic Development Manager with the City of Golden Valley. The other panelists we have here today are Bethany Brunzell, who is Assistant Chief with the Fire Department for the City of Golden Valley, Cheryl Weiler, who is our Communications Director, and from our consultant, BKV, we have Susan Morgan, who will be facilitating this discussion this evening. Will also be handling questions and either answering the questions and or passing them on to the subject matter experts at the city. So thank you all very much for your interest in the fire station location project and for attending the meeting this evening. And Susan, you are on mute. There we go.
I saw that. Oh, we're all used to that now, aren't we? A reminder that this is intended to be a digital open house. And so you folks may be familiar that last week we had 2 in-person open houses. A benefit there is the chance to engage in dialogue and to have questions answered. So while we will be sharing a little bit of a brief introduction to the project and the process and current status, both now at 6 o'clock, but then also at 7 o'clock if folks are coming and going at different times, we do welcome those submissions in the Q&A portion. Cheryl, Sherry, if you can pass hosting duties back to Teresa, I think there's one more administrative content item that she will manage. So folks, please put your questions into Q&A. That is our avenue for engaging with content. And now I'll be sharing an introduction to the project for those who have varying levels of familiarity. I think, Sherry, you may have also touched on this. This presentation will be recorded and shared. The city's website is your source for information about this project, both now and as it continues into the future. Content that has been shared at open houses and at city council presentations is available on that website. And it's a really useful place to go for some of the additional backup on this project. So, formal title of this project is a fire station location analysis. This builds on the work of the 2021 Municipal Facilities Study. And in that, the study provided long-term recommendations for investment in city facilities to support ongoing operations, requirements for future space needs and growth, accommodating evolutions in departmental services. And so as a pre-design and a location analysis, what's really valuable here is that there are actually 2 phases of content or 2 concurrent pathways of work that our team has been doing. The first is a pre-design for the station. So we're not picking materials. We don't even know where it's going yet, right? What we're doing is specifically reaffirming a space program. How big does the facility need to be, or how small? What are those critical components that support fire department operations? And in defining and affirming the size of the station, we're able to determine the size of the site that's necessary. And ultimately, with this additional level of detail that we've been working on with the fire department and the city since last fall, we will be able to provide an updated cost estimation, which will help with further planning, implementation, and funding. The part that you folks are probably here tonight for is the site location analysis. So this process is intended to provide an objective evaluation of potential station locations. We'll share some maps here in a moment, because we're looking to provide complementary coverage to that of the downtown fire station. Golden Valley Fire Department services need to reach all citizens in all part of the community. And so it's important when we do this that we're providing that through what in fire department speak is called response time coverage. And we'll get into that in just a moment. The project has 3 core objectives: informing the continued project development, which we've just spoken about, Expanding on recommendations of the Municipal Facilities Study, which established a preliminary space program and defined a potential size for this station and reaffirmed the need, because it builds on recommendations that were made in 2016 for evolutions that the fire department should make both operationally and in their physical facilities to provide and ensure consistent, reliable service throughout the community, given some changes that are happening nationwide and given changes that are happening locally within Golden Valley. I mentioned that we're affirming space program requirements. So the proposed facility size that we're looking at for the functions that are necessary is approximately 21,000 gross square feet. The size requirements, if we provide a best practice layout, which is a one-story fire station, there's an efficiency in being able to get those staff directly to the fire trucks when needed to be able to get out the door. We would be looking at approximately a 2.3 acre site. You folks may have seen information in the municipal facility study. We also defined whether or not it would be possible to look at a smaller footprint site. A smaller site is possible, but would require us to go to 2 stories, which is somewhat inefficient, as I mentioned, in terms of getting firefighters out to their apparatus. But it also has additional costs because you need to provide egress stairs at both ends of the building. You need to provide an elevator. And so those will provide a slight modest increase in project costs. The third piece of the core project objectives is to utilize this objective site analysis to identify, it's not going to be one site to start, it really will be a short list of sites for further city action. A reminder to folks who may have joined, this is a brief introduction to the project. As we segue into our Q&A portion, please be submitting your comments under Q&A. If you're somebody who submitted your comments in advance, we have a list of questions that we'll start from, but we're welcome, and we invite questions about process, content, outcomes, and otherwise, and we will be answering those shortly. We will also be revisiting this presentation at the top of the next hour as well for folks who join when they're able. So the critical commitments as part of this project are public safety, which is prioritizing timely protection and the safety, well-being, and security of all Golden Valley residents, businesses, visitors, and their property in all areas of the city. Firefighter safety and health is immeasurably important. This project and eventual implementation of a new station needs to respect the service and sacrifice of firefighters with facilities and resources that meet modern best practices for firefighter safety, health, wellness, and equity. As part of our station location selection, 2 priorities have been identified with the working team and with the City Council. First of all, to maximize the safety of residents and property. Through that lens, we're looking to facilitate prompt and consistent emergency response to all Golden Valley residents, businesses, visitors, and their property in all areas of the city, specifically with a location that will complement the service area of downtown Fire Station 1. The next piece is to be a good steward of taxpayer and public resources, integrating consideration of project cost priorities, which includes both the acquisition of a site, relocation costs, development, construction, operations, and maintenance for long-term life cycle cost value, both to the city and to the residents. In the last few open houses, we have been asked questions and residents have been wondering, why is this project necessary? Why now? There are 3 components to why a change is necessary in fire department operations and how that connects with changes in fire department facilities. The first is that nationwide, over the last 30 years plus, there has been an operational transition. And so it is critical for Golden Valley to be a part of that transition because right now they're experiencing challenges to both hiring and retention. Compared to a 40-year average within Golden Valley's department, there is a 22% higher attrition rate, which means the department is losing staff at a 22% higher rate than it has been historically for the last 4 decades. That's because, as you see in the maps here, working from left to right, areas in blue, 40 years ago, most departments were what we call a paid-on-call model, which is to say a volunteer fire service where you respond to a dispatched call from wherever you are. You could be teaching, you could be at home. You come into the fire department, you gear up, you get in the fire truck, and you respond to the call. That 40 years ago was something that was very effective. It was useful. It was a way of mobilizing hands as possible. But there have been changes over time. And so what you're seeing as the map changes from blue to more red is a transition to what is called duty crew service. In a duty crew service, rather than having volunteers who have to respond without knowing when they may be called into the station, a duty crew staffs a shift that covers and provides service 24/7. With modern life, the commitments that firefighters make, whether as parents, as business owners, folks who have multiple jobs, the ability to plan and schedule and coordinate and acknowledge when you may be serving is more feasible. And more staff prefer that model. And so one of the challenges that Golden Valley has faced is that a number of their staff have actually left to communities around Golden Valley that have already made this transition because of the consistency that's afforded by a duty crew service. So the nation is changing. Communities around Golden Valley have been committing to this change. Golden Valley now currently actually utilizes a duty crew approach with their core staff, the chief and assistant chiefs, to provide some consistent service. And so that is actually the genesis of this. It's time for an operational transition. Analysis has shown that given the size of Golden Valley, having 3 fire stations, once you are in a duty crew model with staff who are located and based out of a fire department, is more inefficient with 3 stations than it would be with 2, given the size of the city. The second is, as we talk about that 24/7 service, you need facilities that can support that. The existing fire stations were designed for the paid-on-call approach. So there is a modest set of locker rooms. There are equipment bays for trucks and other elements. There are small, what we call day rooms, but there are no sleeping quarters. There's no on-site training opportunities. And actually the extent and completeness of locker areas does not meet the requirements for a duty crew service. And so the facilities actually need additional space types and additional space capacity to support these needs. One thing I'll point out here is that training opportunities, when they're integrated within the building, allow firefighters to train on shift. There's a benefit to this versus having firefighters train off-site, which both requires time and a half pay, but also means that they're not available at the station to respond to fires in the same way. So it's a different level of planning that's required. You can actually provide more consistent training when you can provide training opportunities on site. The third comes back to one of those core priorities, which is a commitment to firefighter health and safety. Science has changed and illuminated critical components over the last 4 decades. We now understand that firefighter exposure to carcinogens occurs not simply at the source of fires, but it actually is brought back to the station through the gear that the firefighters utilize. The image that you're seeing on the right-hand side is that Golden Valley's current fire stations, for instance, primarily provide gear storage within the equipment bays. So next to the trucks, next to where exhaust is. And so whether it's exhaust from equipment or whether it's having clean gear next to gear that's just come back from a fire, There are carcinogens there that actually can come back into firefighters, whether through breathing or through skin contact. The diagram on the lower right indicates contemporary approaches to cancer prevention, which is to say separation of those spaces that have potentially carcinogenic components in them from the areas that firefighters may spend other portions of their time, including office spaces, day rooms, and the like. Two other components I will touch on very lightly is that as we look at a 24/7 service, sleep deprivation is a critical component and impacts firefighter cognition and reaction time and long-term health. And so that's something that needs to be supported with correct facility components. The third is that the nature of public safety work is incredibly demanding, physically, psychologically, socially, and emotionally. So it's important to build personal connections. And so spaces within a fire station that support firefighter health and wellness overall, that allow firefighters to build bonds with one another, increases their collaboration and camaraderie as it relates to being on site, but also provides an opportunity for them to support one another after events. As we segue into the station location analysis portion of this, the project developed site selection criteria. These were initially shared with the public in October of last year, and they center around components that distinctly, trying to think about how best to say this, that distinctly impact the effectiveness of one site versus another site. Because as we look at a fire station, yes, there are aspects of sustainability and traffic, but really critically, location for response times as we think about that complementary coverage is critical. So our criteria include a location for response, that's covering as many of the historic calls as possible. The second component is a location for response covering as much of the city area as possible. And the next is an appropriate amount of buildable land. That relates to the components we talked about earlier, the size needed both for the building itself, for the vehicular flow and movement, and for ensuring that we have sufficient space on the perimeter of the site for the necessary kind of boundaries, landscaping, and fencing that would make the new building a good neighbor. There are two cost components, a relative cost to acquire the site and the land. This also includes relocation costs. And then there's a relative cost to build. Some sites may have elements such as more steeply sloping land. That requires a different kind of foundation system and would, for instance, have a slightly higher cost. When we look at impact, there were two primary impacts identified, neighborhood impact and then civic presence and recruitment, which relates to the visibility of a fire station, because it's important for the fire department to continually be visible for potential new firefighters to be able to connect with opportunities. As I started, the other two are traffic issues. This relates to the degree to which any existing traffic patterns would need to be modified. And the final one is sustainability. To what extent does a site support a sustainable and efficient building? The map that you see on screen, and just a reminder for folks, this is a brief introduction that's running a little long. I'll be wrapping this up shortly for questions. Please submit your questions in the Q&A function. We will be having panelists respond to those questions. We will also be coming back to this information at the top of the next hour. And please also always go to the city's website for additional information where content such as this presentation are available for the public. The map that you see on screen is what we call a response time map. So the curiously shaped green blob represents the amount of the city that fire trucks responding from the downtown fire station can get to. A response time map is a nationwide process used nationwide consistently that relies on GIS mapping. So rather than an as the crow flies, how much can you cover? It is actually a realistic evaluation of the streets, the roads that you have to go through from point A to point B. And it takes a historic average so that it's reflecting challenges such as differences during daytime and evening commute and otherwise. As you can see on this map, the downtown fire station covers a majority of the city west of Highway 100. As we look at providing an efficient, effective two-station model, we then need to locate the new station so that it can provide sufficient coverage of everything east of Highway 100, particularly the north part of the city, the east side around Theodore Wirth, and then down into the south side of the city. This project has identified a core development area that would be either a half a mile east of Highway 100 or a half a mile west. And what you're seeing are three core areas of exploration, although we have analyzed a few in between. As we look at locating either along Glenwood Avenue on the south, Highway 55 at the center, or Duluth Street on the north, what that would allow the fire department is to be efficient and effective in connecting to Highway 100 as fast as possible, which allows them to reach each part of the city more effectively. If we were on side streets, that would increase the total amount of response time. As you folks may have seen, the team has gone through two current rounds of analysis of sites. Initially, this was anonymous, which is to say the BKV group team was analyzing potential sites using our site criteria, but not identifying things by address. We analyzed 13 total site areas, specific intersections along those core roads that we just discussed, an evaluation of 37 distinct parcels. This includes a combination of both commercial and residential properties. And sites come up with a range of scores. Lower ranked sites have challenges that relate to poor response times, higher costs of land acquisition, whereas higher ranked sites have a beneficial location for response times and may also often have closer to average cost to acquire and build. What you're seeing here initially on screen was, prior to the time of our open houses, the current top 5 sites. Those are sites where their cumulative scores are higher than others. And I should note that, and for folks who were at the in-person open houses, out of our 37 sites, we have scores everything from 20 all the way down to -43 or greater. So some of these sites have more challenges than others. As we look at the highest ranked sites in each of those areas, south, center, and north, in the south side, locating along Glenwood Avenue, you're far enough south that actually within the National Fire Protection Association's guidelines for a 4-minute response time for the fire department to travel from the station to an incident, the north and the northeast portions of the cities cannot be reached in 4 or 5 minutes. The yellow blobs are 5 minutes, the green blobs are 4 minutes. So the highest ranked site located along Glenwood Avenue covers 68% of the city within a 4-minute travel time, and they reach 76% of the historic calls. Our team has done an analysis of the last 10. From the central, if there was another station complementary to the downtown station that would be located along Highway 55, you are covering a slightly higher amount of the city, 72% within 4-minute travel time, and you're covering a slightly higher amount of historic calls, 79%. As you're seeing on the north side, because of Golden Valley's unique geography with the little top hat, if we locate a fire station along Duluth Street or Golden Valley Road as it crosses over Highway 100, you are covering the highest amount of the city, 76%. You're covering the highest amount of historic calls reached, which is 86%. So it's been important for the team and for the city to continue looking at sites in all 3 areas. There's been a question about project timeline. Project history goes all the way back to the Fire Rescue Services study in 2016, which identified the need both for the operational transition and for the transition from a 3-station to a 2-station model. We're here bridging between the start of this project in fall 2022 and what is a current potential timeline, which would be a start of construction in 2025. That's subject to funding and subject to design. Again, a reminder for folks, as I bring this to a close, we're about to start the Q&A portion. Please submit your questions in the Q&A section. We look forward to answering those. And in fact, there we are with the questions and answers. And so with that, Cheryl, it would be great to take our first question.
You know, while Cheryl's looking through the questions, I might take this opportunity to note that there were a couple of fire department specific questions that came up. One is particularly about 4-minute response times, and the other is comparing the Bloomington Fire Department situation to Golden Valley. And I think those are both great questions for Bethany Brunzell.
Yes, thank you, Bethany.
Sure. So I just want to scroll here for a second. So the question about Bloomington Fire was, how do you address the fact that Bloomington Fire has staffing issues despite a new station, 30% below staffing levels? Obviously, Bloomington Fire Department is different than we are in Golden Valley. And there is no belief here that a brand new fire station is going to magically solve staffing challenges. Every single fire department in the state and across the country is struggling with staffing challenges right now. Even the large career fire departments like Minneapolis and St. Paul that used to get thousands upon thousands of applications when they were hiring are now seeing hundreds. So it's a universal challenge. The other thing about Bloomington, the way they are choosing to address their staffing challenges is they applied for and received a federal FEMA SAFER grant, which they are using to hire 18 full-time firefighters. In Golden Valley, we're, instead of choosing to hire more full-time people, we are choosing to transition into a duty crew staffing model, which allows us to maintain the use of paid on-call firefighters. We believe in using people in our community. We believe in having that diverse group of people who come from all different walks of life and backgrounds and are able to do this on top of other commitments such as family and jobs outside of the fire department. So that's why we are looking at this, and to accommodate that duty crew staffing, especially with overnight staffing of stations, we need to have a new station because our current stations don't accommodate places to sleep, and all the current best practices as was discussed earlier. The other question that was fire department specific was, why are the response times, or sorry, no, I'm looking at the wrong one. Isn't the 4 minutes response time specifically for fires? Haven't the vast majority of historical calls been for things other than fire? The 4-minute response time comes from the National Fire Protection Association, commonly called NFPA, is their guidelines for response. So they use that as a guideline for really anything. It is absolutely true that the vast majority of our calls have not been for fires. That is true for every single fire department in the country, in the world. Fires make up a small percentage of what we do. However, things like medical emergencies, time is just as critical, if not even maybe more so than that. If someone is in cardiac arrest and needs CPR, we need to get there as soon as possible to give that person the best possible chance of being resuscitated. So yes, fires in Golden Valley are very low, which is a wonderful thing. We're very happy about that, but we still need to be able to respond quickly to other things too, such as medical calls, car crashes, and we don't know necessarily that an emergency is not a fire until we get there. It could be something such as someone's smoke alarm going off in their home. Until we get there, we don't know that's not a fire. So we still need to be able to get there quickly in the chance that it is. Thank you for those questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Assistant Chief. Reminder to folks, please keep submitting your questions in the Q&A portion. And Cheryl, I believe you may have some additional ones that we could share with the panel.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just chime in a little bit on the first question that Bethany answered. You know, the Golden Valley Fire has a great group of volunteers that we've been privileged to work with over the past couple of years. And, you know, we don't anticipate that a new station will be critical to retain people who have committed to the fire department. But we do recognize that this transition to a duty crew model will help them attract new people and make sure that they can offer their volunteers a more predictable career as a firefighter. One of the things that we haven't really talked a lot about, Bloomington has gotten some federal funds to help them pay for some additional firefighters who are career firefighters. That's their full-time job. They don't have an additional job. That model is expensive. It's probably twice as expensive as using a volunteer-based organization. And while Bloomington was able to get some federal funding for that, that's not in perpetuity. So one of the things that Chief Corelli has been adamant about throughout this process is that the volunteer model is working well for Golden Valley. There is a cadre of people who are willing to give of their time and serve as firefighters in this community. It's not critical to move to a model that has full-time staff that are paid as career firefighters like Minneapolis or St. Paul departments have. And that's saving, as a huge chunk of money for the city every year. Over the long term, I don't think that we know whether or not the volunteer-based model will last for Golden Valley. It could be that in 20 years, the city needs to move to a career model. It could be that in 50 years, the city needs to move to a career model. When that time comes, the facility that we're considering for this remote fire station, as well as the downtown fire station, when it gets redone, will support career staff. So the facility that's envisioned will be appropriate for volunteer staff, as well as for future career staff if that bridge needs to be crossed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So for folks who just joined us, the panelists answering questions tonight are Craig Carter, BKV Group's Fire Department Practice Lead, Assistant Chief Bethany Brunsell, and Sherry, who is with the city. Cheryl, I believe you've got some questions that we've been waiting to kind of chime in with. I'm interested to hear what you've got on tap. Thank you.
Okay, well, one of the first questions in the Q&A is if we're going to be answering the ones submitted before the 4 p.m. deadline. And we have 36 questions. Many of them were around the same theme. So we've grouped them. And since we've been talking about response times, I think I'm just going to go ahead and follow up with the 4 questions that were on that topic. I think some of them may have been answered. They were talking about why there are 2 questions about NFPA standards that cover response times, and they seem to be applied to career departments and not paid on call. And so why are we considering standards that are applicable to a larger city department and not ours?
That's a great question to start with, and I think, Craig, you are the person to answer that.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to tackle that one. I totally appreciate the research that folks have done into NFPA. You can read through all of the NFPA standards online. You can sign up for a free account on their website and get access to all of the brutal detail included in those documents. There's a lot of them. They're traditionally, as soon as we talk about staffing a station 24/7, 365, which is appropriate for a duty crew model, and will be a huge benefit to response times and public safety throughout the city of Golden Valley. And as Susan mentioned, it's already started. The duty crews are rotating between stations 2, 3, and 1, and responding from each of those during daytime or maybe I say awake periods for the past year or so. And it's been a great thing for response times and the calls that they can get to. But once we start staffing a station and have people sitting in the station waiting for calls to arrive, we're traditionally that's considered as a department that needs to comply with the career coverage model, where there's a goal of a 4-minute travel time from the station to an incident. There is a separate standard, 1720, that talks about true volunteer companies, and that's understood to be fire departments, which are still, the most common type of fire department in the United States, where the firefighters are responding from home or work to the firehouse, then getting their gear on, and from there proceeding to the fire. And so the expectations for fire departments, under that volunteer rubric, are that it's going to take you probably about 4 minutes to get to the station, then probably about 80 seconds to get your gear on, and then 4 minutes to drive. Whereas for a career station, or a station that's staffed with duty crews 24/7, 365, we've got about 80 seconds to get from wherever you are within the facility, get your gear on, get in the vehicles and start rolling out the door, and then 4 minutes of travel time. So you're already saving about 4 minutes once you move to that different model, that duty crew model.
Thank you very much, Craig. And I think
while technically you're still saying this is a duty crew or volunteer or staff with volunteers, because people are going to be at the station, we're falling under that 1710 NFPA 1710 threshold.
Thank you very much, Craig. I think what's really valuable there is that you've highlighted that the expectation of how long it takes you to get from the station to an incident is the same regardless of model, and that it's that NFPA allows additional time in a volunteer or paid on call for staff to arrive to the station first. Thank you very much. Cheryl,
It's also probably worth mentioning that there are implications to the costs of your insurance, your homeowner's insurance, when we talk about this. And a department that is responding from home rather than as a duty crew is going to, the citizens in that fire protection area are going to have higher costs of homeowners insurance than those where that fire stations are staffed 24/7, 365. It's difficult to quantify the numbers there. We know that there's a difference. The insurance companies will admit that there's a difference, but they're not willing to admit the level of difference, because that's part of their competitive edge against each other and so forth.
Thank you. And as you folks can tell, Craig has a lot of knowledge about fire service. We are going to seek to try to get to as many questions as possible. For folks who just joined, please submit your questions in the Q&A. There were questions received in advance, and we're moving through those. There's a presentation that we will also touch on in about another half an hour. We'll come back to it for those who've just recently joined. But Cheryl, I believe you have another question for us.
So we have another group of questions kind of around the choice to go from 3 stations to 2, and why we made that decision. Is it valid? So for example, we have a question, does the city have concrete data that indicates the site of Station 3 cannot be used as a site for a modernized facility? Is there data on what the taxpayers will be funding in the form of this new fire station? My concern is that the data would not support the need for potentially extravagant services or features that the Golden Valley community does not need. While upgrades might be needed to attract firefighters, do we need to upgrade past what the Station 3 could support? Another question that's related, why can't Station 3 be demolished instead of homes and a new station built? 5701 Glenwood is selling her home, and therefore no eminent domain needed. These are also related to 2 questions in the Q&A. They're talking about the response times above and below 4 minutes. Why were they excluded in the analysis? BKV admitted 2 stations cannot cover all of Golden Valley, so the analysis is incomplete. And then there was one more question in the Q&A related to the stations. I think this one maybe is similar. Did we explore land options for a 2-story firehouse, which would require less land and a modest cost increase? So it's kind of a lot, but they're all related.
I was going to say, Cheryl, thank you very much. And Craig, I'm actually going to start us on this one, if that's all right. I believe within that question and the combination of folks who've also maybe chimed in from the Q&A, there are multiple components here. I'm going to start with the first, which is And I'll start with this, which is, although the question started with the 3-station to 2-station model, I'm going to start from the can we use fire stations number 2 and 3. So the existing, and Craig, let me just keep going here for a moment. Existing fire stations 2 and 3 are both on parcels of land where there are constraints for our ability to grow the facility or to reconfigure it effectively. Station number 3 is bound by the Laurel Apartments. Pardon me, Station 3 at the top is bound by Bonnie and housing in Bassett Creek. Station 2 at Turner's Crossroads is bound by the Laurel Apartments. And so there is not capacity on those sites for us to reconfigure those facilities for the requirements necessary. Craig, I think you were maybe going to chime in about the distinction between the 3-station versus the 2-station model. And I know we can also reference how there's a cost efficiency in transitioning in a way that supports the duty crew model.
Well, I would be happy to talk about that. In 2016, the city underwent a study by a very reputable firm in the industry that analyzed the idea of staying with 3 stations, moving to 2 stations, and analyzed the implications of remaining a kind of a true volunteer respond from home organization versus moving to a staffed duty crew organization with volunteers picking up specific shifts. And at that point in time, the consultants recommended and city staff and city council agreed that a move to a duty crew situation was important for the city. And that was because overall response times would be reduced as we eliminated that 4-minute drive time between your place of business or your house and the fire station you respond out of, as well as the ability to attract volunteers would be enhanced because their commitment is predictable, as we discussed at the top of the hour. The other component of that analysis is the cost. The existing 3 stations provide pretty good coverage to the city of Golden Valley. Unfortunately, Station 3 is providing, because it's really close to the border with Minneapolis, it provides fantastic coverage to a lot of Minneapolis citizens. But the city of Minneapolis does not allow Golden Valley to respond into their territory. Station 2 provides fantastic service to many citizens of St. Louis Park. And while St. Louis Park is willing to let Golden Valley respond into their jurisdiction when there's a big fire, that's not an everyday occurrence, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to protect St. Louis Park when the goal is to protect Golden Valley. In addition to those considerations, that the stations are old, the land areas are relatively small, the buildings are not in great repair. And they don't currently accommodate overnight crews. The number of volunteers that it takes to operate a duty crew system, which again the city council has said that they want to move to, is above and beyond the number of volunteers that Golden Valley expects to be able to reasonably recruit. With somewhere between 50 and 60 volunteers, which the city's been relatively consistent in attracting and retaining that many over the lifespan of the department, especially recently. You can staff duty crews on 2 stations with that number of people, in the sense that people are willing to sign up for shifts that put them on site in the fire station enough to cover 30 people, 25 to 30 people can cover 24/7, 365, the duty crews that the city has established. Once we introduce a 3rd station, we would need an additional 25 to 30 volunteers. And the analysis back in 2016 was that it's unlikely that there's an additional 25 to 30 people within the community that have the time and inclination to devote to the fire service. And while we talked earlier about drawing volunteers from surrounding areas and how some of the surrounding departments have poached people away from Golden Valley because of the predictability of the duty crew model, it's unlikely that we can poach 25 to 30 people away from the surrounding communities to satisfy the needs for that third station. So, that's a huge component of the question, is about whether or not we could really staff 3 stations. And the analysis that was conducted back in 2016 by, again, a reputable company said probably not. You can staff 2 stations, but not 3. And can you locate 2 stations that will serve the community appropriately? Their analysis was yes. Analysis in 2022, 2023 concurs with that. And there's been some updates to where calls have occurred and in the expected travel times as road networks change and stuff like that. But we think it's appropriate to switch to a 2-station model as well from a response time perspective.
Craig, could you just add to that? One question just came in related to how the new fire station would relate to the replacement of Fire Station 1 in downtown Golden Valley. If you could just say a few words about that, please.
The intention after the study that was conducted in 2021-ish, the overall municipal facility study, one of the priorities the council had was to keep a station downtown. And really the downtown station is pretty well positioned to respond to calls through a large portion of the city. And you can kind of see the green blob here. It's more than 60% of calls, or somewhere around 60% of the calls that it can reach just by itself. There might be, you could shift it, in minor ways around the downtown area and maybe get some incremental increases in that. But the overriding issues with downtown and turning that into the place that City Council envisions says that this station is probably located right about where it is. Minor variations in that, certainly on the northeast corner of the intersection of Winnetka and Golden Valley. So part of that is, we're starting with that in mind, but also we did a little bit of testing about response times, and it's in a good location. We can't say that it's not. If we took over the McDonald's property, we would be incrementally better, but McDonald's isn't enthusiastic about moving, and probably rightly so. That provides some good tax revenue for the city. It makes sense to leave the downtown station where it is. So really we're looking for something that complements the downtown station and responds to the east half of the city. And one of the things that Susan didn't really get into, not a criticism, Susan, just lack of time, is that, and you can see pretty clearly here, response times from downtown, within 4 minutes, we can get to a lot of the city, but we're not getting very much past Highway 100, right? So we're basically blocked by that. And that's because there's only 3 ways you can cross that street. Aside from Lilac, that goes back and forth a little bit, buried in the neighborhoods, but that's not really effective for the fire department. So we need something that's going to serve the east half of the city, everything to the east of Highway 100. But because there's no north-south streets that go over there except for Highway 100, we also have to have great access to Highway 100. So we're looking for a location that has great access to Highway 100. And, that's the primary thing, so that we can get set as well as onto it going north and south.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Craig. And Cheryl, before we move on to the next one, your multi-part question had 2 other components I'd like to touch on briefly. There was a question about a 2-story facility. The team's preliminary analysis, as I had mentioned, while the best practice or most efficient and effective would be a 1-story model, which would be about 2.3 acres, there is the opportunity to utilize a slightly smaller site if we have the right configuration for vehicle access. That would be just over an acre, I think about 1.3 as well, and some of these really vary with geometry. A 2-story station would be possible, and this project at this point is continuing to entertain whichever opportunity works with the potential shortlist of sites. And for some of the shortlisted sites, a 1-story may be both efficient and effective and appropriate. And in other locations or for the sites available, it may be that a 2-story is feasible. The second
just to
question,
tack on to that a little bit, I think, the analysis says that adding a 2nd story, the stairs and the elevators associated with that, and a little bit of inefficiency with stacking the building, is probably about $650,000 worth of cost. So there's added cost when you go to 2 stories, but most of the site options that we've examined so far have included a 2-story facility. Because, you know, ultimately that $650,000 is relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of property acquisition and the impacts to neighborhoods. You know, so most of the time when we're looking at these site options, we're already looking at 2-story facilities.
Yes, thank you. And then the last piece, just Cheryl, before we get to the next question, there was embedded in your first question, notion of taxpayer costs and how much of this project might be borne by taxpayers. At this point, the city is continuing to work on funding strategies. There is a request into the state bond, to the state for bond funding. The city is exploring a number of options to fund the project, and further information on potential costs and tax impacts to residents will be something that will follow after this particular project. Cheryl, back to you for another question.
Okay, so we have several questions related to the following themes: process, location choices, purchase process, and neighborhood impact, and then staff qualifications. And I don't know how many new people. It looks like maybe only 4 have joined since we started, but I don't think we're going to get through all these questions and do all of another presentation. So I don't know if you want to ask the audience if they want to indicate in the Q&A if they do need another run through of the presentation, or if they want to continue with the Q&A, but we do have quite a few to go through yet, and they're important questions.
One thing I'd like to add also, seeing all the questions, I think there are many questions that have been asked that will be addressed at the Tuesday City Council work session with the City Council members. I think it's important that we're touching on some that might not be discussed at that meeting. We will be following up to provide answers to all of the questions, probably in an FAQ of some sort. But with that said, we have seen the participant level rise from 30 a little after we increased it to almost 50 now. And so it seems like there's been at least 20 people that could be new since the first presentation was ended. So I thought I'd share that information.
Yeah, and
I think, Cheryl, your indication is useful. I also could be more brief in reviewing some of these slides for the folks who've joined since we went through the slides. We're providing a little bit of background. We're also moving a little bit between the slides as we answer questions, and that may be effective, knowing that we both had a list of questions received in advance and those that are coming in tonight. So our goal certainly is to try to address as many both of the kind of themes and issues as they arise and the individual questions as possible.
If you guys don't mind, I'd like to tackle the process question a little bit, because I don't know that's covered.
Before you start, can I just give you, like, we have a couple. People want to have the process described. What's the process going to be for deciding the final location? When will the decision be made? Can options beyond home removal be revisited once it is made? Are we talking about just a fire station or more, the police department, etc.? And there were a couple of questions about was the environmental impact on the areas we're looking at ever considered?
You know, I think I can handle the environmental impact sort of question, but I think Sherry might be the most appropriate person to talk about, you know, when, you know, the timing decisions and stuff like that. From an environmental impact perspective, just real quick, you know, we had the sustainability metric that we looked at, which was pretty limited, and really that was looking at the solar orientation of the building, whether we were getting, you know, whether we were able to orient the building to take advantage of kind of the, you know, where the sun is during the summer and winter or not. And that's a long-term, you know, if this is a 70-year building, that's going to impact energy use and stuff, and occupant comfort over the long term of the building. And so that was a key component. And we also looked at whether or not the sites would challenge the use of photovoltaics. And really none of them were challenging that we ended up considering. Many of the sustainability things that the city would do for this facility will be done regardless of which site is selected. And so, you know, the other things that kind of play into that from a sustainability standpoint would be demolition and whether or not we're creating a waste stream just by our location. That was not a part of the consideration. We could have potentially looked at reuse of buildings, which would be challenging for a fire station, to be perfectly honest. But that was not a part of the consideration. Sometimes we are asked to look at a connection to mass transportation for the firefighters. That was not something that was important to this facility. Impact to wetlands and floodplains and drainage patterns was considered as we reviewed this, in the sense that we excluded areas that were subject to floodplain and wetlands from our consideration. We're not proposing that we're going to impact wetlands or build in floodplains. Any area that these sites had that was in a wetland was excluded from the ability to kind of build on it. So that one component is definitely in there too. And then I'll turn it over a little bit to Sherry.
I'll make this quick. Really, the answer is we don't have a set timeline that staff has laid out for this work. It is really up to the city council how quickly they choose to make some decisions. We have before us another work session that is discussion only on Tuesday evening, the 14th. For those of you that have better plans during Valentine's Day, we will be making that recording available again on the city website if you'd like to watch the meeting at a different time. I think it's important to note that at some point, we believe the council will proceed further with a shorter list of potential sites for the new station location. We're expecting that this spring. Whether it will be in March or April depends on a lot of the discussion that happens Tuesday night, the questions that the city council has that asks us to follow up on, and how long it takes us to provide that information for them to consider further. Once the city council does, though, however, start to identify properties that are on the short list to look into further, that is when we will engage an appraiser to determine property values. We have the ability to look at comps. We know some properties that are on the market. We're able to, maybe determine an average square footage, but we have not engaged a professional to determine any property values yet. So that would be a first step, as well as a consultant that specializes in acquiring properties, and also to prepare relocation packages on behalf of the city. Of course, early outreach to affected property owners, whether it's a business owner or a resident or tenants, if applicable at all, would be very important to provide information as soon as possible, and to foster a trusted relationship. I think that is probably all the information we have at this time in the process. I must add that, whether we've had a lot of different questions about whether or not the city council will look at commercial properties only or public land only, and whether it's necessary for the city council to look at residential properties. And those are questions that are for the city council to discuss and decide. Those aren't questions that staff can answer.
Thank you very much, Sherry. I know, Cheryl, you had identified a couple of common themes, but if you could give us a little bit of elaboration, we'll respond to a couple of those outstanding items that you have from your current set.
Okay, well, the purchase process questions, there were several, and kind of following up where Sherry left off, here are a few of them, and I'll kind of go through them and try to summarize the longer ones. But for those of us that have been informed our homes are up for consideration, what can we expect for timing and more detailed information? Will we be immediately notified in the event our property is removed from consideration? Surely we can't expect to just put our lives on hold until a location is finalized. Following that, will we be immediately notified if we're removed? What will the purchase process look like for impacted homeowner? Timeline, appraisal method, negotiation process. What compensation will be available to homes that aren't acquired but may have their value negatively impacted? How will updates be communicated to the impacted homes and their immediate neighbors? If the final location selection leads to Golden Valley residents being forced to part with their homes, what does that process look like and how is fair market value determined? What, if anything, can be said or done to avoid local families from losing the roofs over their heads? When would the homes you are considering to remove going to be notified if a data request wasn't ever done? Did I read? When would the homes you are considering to remove going to be notified if a data request wasn't done? So I think that means when were we going to tell people if the data request hadn't come, would we have not told them? I think. Will the city cover property value depreciation due to the demise of the neighborhood? And is the city trying to bully us to give up our homes because we wouldn't give up our park? So there's a lot of similar themes in there, and perhaps you can address them as a group.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cheryl. Just to say that for the folks who've submitted those questions, some common themes that we heard in both of the previous open houses. So other residents are asking similar questions. I think, Sherry, I'd like to go to you first for a little bit more information about timeline of notification and coordination, building on some of your previous responses.
Yes, I think we as staff had hoped that the city council would be at a point to have a much shorter list of properties under consideration before making addresses public. We know that we identified 130 separate addresses of businesses and homeowners, and felt that because those addresses needed to be shared, that it was absolutely necessary to provide that notice. If we had had the opportunity for the city council to continue to look at the sites without specific addresses and narrow that list to maybe 4 or 8 properties, we would have preferred that, but we did not. I think transparency is of utmost importance. And, you know, I just want to say that we understand how emotional and how difficult and challenging this situation is for everyone. With that said, I know the city council has received all of the emails and phone calls, and will also be taking this very seriously at their next discussion. So with that said, I think I kind of generally outlined the process, and I don't really want to get into the details in the process of what a fair market value and a relocation process would be for single family homes, or in specifically for, you know, over 100 properties, until we know that the city council really is looking at those homes or not.
Thank you very much, Sherry.
Anyone who wants to contact me offline, of course, I'd be happy to discuss it with them.
Thank you very much. And Cheryl, just before you chime in, I'm going to briefly note that one question that is sometimes tied into this is that we understand that residents are concerned that the city is only looking at residential properties and that they may only be looking at Golden Valley Road. that is not the case. The current exploration is, and as Sherry has noted, and as Craig explained earlier, is looking at the three zones that you're looking at on screen right now, which is continuing to look at properties, both residential and commercial, along Duluth Street, along Highway 55, and along Glenwood Avenue. One thing I would note for individuals who may have attended one of the last two open houses, since that time, we've had additional inquiries from the city about exploring and analyzing additional sites. And so at the council workshop, the team will be sharing some updates of additional sites that have been processed and analyzed using the site criteria. So I think it is important to note that there is no short list at this point. There has been no narrowing down to any specific neighborhood or intersection. And the dialogue really critically, and as you noted, Sherry, really must go in front of the city council for continued discernment. But it is, the process is offering consideration of sites in all three of these zones and in both property types at this time.
And it's important
Cheryl.
to note that the additional sites are not single-family homes, or they are not residential properties.
Correct. Thank you. I know, Cheryl, you had your hand up. Pardon me. Thank you.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time to address this question. It came up in a number of the questions about location choices, and the term is eminent domain. And a lot of people are wondering, is the city going to use that? And I don't know if
Yeah, I'd like
this is
to
the right
respond
place
to
to
that if
answer
I
that.
may, and Sherry, I'll probably share it with you in just a moment. This has been a question, and I do want to kind of reiterate, it's really valuable in a process like this when questions arise commonly. And so in both of the other open houses this came up, we're also hearing this through the letters. We understand that there may be both past history and conversations unrelated to this project that have used the phrase eminent domain. As part of this station location analysis, the direction that was provided to our team and our understanding of the process is that the city's goal is to start from the approach of engaging that potential shortlist and exploring feasibility of those tenants or property owners that may be most inclined to engage in a transaction which would provide compensation, fair market value for a property, and fair market value for relocation costs. That would truly be a dialogue and collaboration between the city and any potential property owners. And at least as far as we understand it today, would not include the notion of eminent domain, which would be a kind of forced displacement of a property owner in any case. Sherry, I know you may have some additional notes on that.
Real quick before you jump into that, I just want to excuse myself for a moment.
Go ahead.
I just want to excuse myself for a moment. I'll be back shortly.
Thank you, Craig. Sherry.
Yeah, I think as Susan said, the city council would have to make that decision, and it would be a last choice decision.
Thank you very much.
So we have a large chunk of questions about location choices. Excuse me. Several about neighborhood impact, and then a few on staff qualifications. So
I'd like to touch on neighborhood impact if we might. That was
Okay.
a really common theme in our other open houses, and I want to be sure that the attendees tonight can hear some similar comments and responses. Thank you.
okay. I just felt for a minute like it was Jeopardy. I'd like to select neighborhood impact.
And
We'll
did,
take
and
it
we
for the
did
daily
make
double,
the
yes.
decision not to review the presentation again. Is that correct?
That seemed to be the consensus. We
Great.
now have 45 attendees, and a lot of people
Yeah.
are saying they feel familiar with the material. They would like their questions answered.
And it
Yeah.
can be, we are recording this, it can be watched later if anyone is interested.
And this PDF will also be available for review, as are the other open house materials and the prior city council workshop materials. So there's a lot of content on the city website. I know that link is in the chat, so please take advantage of that. But Cheryl, back to the neighborhood impact questions.
Okay. Please explain the training that would take place at the new fire station location as far as impacts on the immediate neighborhood. For example, frequency, time of day, numbers involved, potential noise issues, etc. The concerns being periodically bringing a large number of people to the area causing parking concerns if street parking would be implemented, and noise issues for outdoor activities or exercises. Please explain any training activities that would occur at the new station. Same question, number of people involved, time of day, frequency, types of activities. And then what regulations exist for use of lights and sirens in a residential neighborhood? And please describe the training activities that would be conducted at that new station location. Again, concerns about parking and location, time of day, number of people involved.
Excellent. That's I think a wonderful set of questions for us to start with. Bethany, I'm going to go to you very shortly, but I'm just going to start with a preliminary note about that question of parking. So one of the differences between the paid on-call response and a duty crew is in a paid on-call model, all staff are paged to come to the site. And so for folks who may live near some of the existing stations, you may be familiar with an influx of traffic for folks who need to respond to calls. In a duty crew model, the need to call in additional staff is specifically related to higher intensity calls. And so you don't have that every single call requirement where you have staff reporting to the station. The benefit is the staff who are on shift at that time will be the primary group that responds to calls, and only when the scale or severity of an incident warrants it would additional staff be called in. And the project site plan includes a provision, and we had an earlier question about how much parking do you really need to provide. We have to follow code and we have to follow zoning requirements. And those calculations include parking that supports both the staff that are on shift, allowing for a portion of that volume. And in the case of this facility, we anticipate it will be a polling place. And so there is a consideration about that volume of traffic. And so the intent is that as much as possible, the staff volume of vehicles responding to the station would be able to be accommodated on site rather than causing any impacts with additional street traffic. Although that is something that we would continue to study per site. But Bethany, I'd love to go to you for a little bit of a description of the training activities that will take place on site.
Absolutely. So one of the big benefits as well for us moving to a duty crew staffing model is that allows us to schedule a lot of the training while personnel are already on duty. So that means that we're potentially looking at a total of 4, 5, maybe 6 if we have some additional staff coming in to help with the training, as far as the total number of people that would be training at one time. We potentially could be doing some larger trainings that would involve more people, but it's not going to create a traffic issue. It's not going to create a huge number of vehicles, and it'd be actually less of an impact than what we see right now. As far as the types of training activities and the concerns about noise or disruptions, one of the things we're looking to incorporate as we build a new fire station is to be able to find ways to incorporate training capacities into the building itself. Currently, none of our 3 fire stations have any real good abilities to do a lot of hands-on training within the building itself. So if we can build it, and thank you for the slide that just came up in that middle photo where you can see inside the apparatus bay a ladder being climbed by the firefighter. We can have windows like that where inside the fire station itself, we can be climbing ladders. We're looking at having a tower where hoses are used for drying. It would have stairs that we can use for climbing, pipes in there that we can connect water to that's similar to the piping we have in, say, the stairwell in an apartment building. So it's not looking to do a whole bunch of training outdoors. It would not be training involving actual fire. It's not going to be training that's going to be, anything that is going to be causing, concerns about polluting. It's not going to be super noisy. It's most likely, the training that would be taking place outdoors might be doing things such as having a vehicle that we practice cutting apart with tools used for extrication, commonly referred to as the jaws of life, that we use if there's a vehicle. There's a minimal amount of noise with some of those tools. There may be some use of things like saws as we practice to using some of our tools. But those are going to typically occur during daytime, daylight hours. They're not going to be training overnight because we want to allow our firefighters to be able to sleep when they're not running emergency calls overnight. So I think the noise concerns would be very minimal. It would not be anything greater than we currently exist. I can understand when we start talking training people, maybe envisioning, fires and smoke from fires, and that's not the case whatsoever. We are not looking to build a live fire training facility. They would be very expensive, and we just wouldn't have the space for that as well. So it's things we're looking to incorporate into the building at a minimal cost, which would happen inside the building itself, so that firefighters can train when they're on shift. Again, it goes back to this idea that we're trying to more efficiently use our firefighters' time, so they're not coming in for additional days or evenings like they are right now to do some training. They can do it while they're there in a small group, which is a better training model anyway, to be able to get more hands-on experience. So hopefully that addresses some of those concerns or questions about the types of trainings we would be doing.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I know that it's the fire department's goal to be a good neighbor. And so if there ever were those a few times a year larger events or activities, we would anticipate that the department might reach out to their immediately adjacent neighbors and notify them of an upcoming event. It's also important to note that the fire department is subject to noise regulations, and not making noise louder than what would be expected or allowed by any other individual or group. I'm going to come back to you, Bethany, for just a moment. The question that folks always want to know is, do fire trucks always have to put on lights and sirens when they leave a station?
Great question. And the answer to that is no, we do not always need to put on the lights and sirens immediately. There are some times when we don't use the lights and sirens at all. A lot of times we will not use lights and sirens when we are in an immediate residential area, and we'll wait until we get onto a more major road to use those lights and sirens when we need to get the attention of drivers to get them to move out of our way so that we can get through. So having a fire station in your neighborhood does not automatically mean you're going to be hearing lights and sirens 24/7. One, Golden Valley isn't that busy of a fire station, and two, we don't use them every single time we leave on a call.
That's very helpful. I know that sometimes they're also related when it's a really large structure fire, when there's an understanding of a real severity of incidents that can offer trigger just by regulations, the need for the lights and sirens. But as you noted, and as folks may not know, I believe I have these numbers generally correct. Your current average number of fires per year is between 7 and 8. So that's a really modest number of total fire events. And those are often ones that might have, at the highest level of severity, the requirement for lights or sirens.
Yep. And while we're talking about fire events, I'm just going to jump in and answer a question that I saw in the Q&A. Someone had asked how often North Memorial Ambulance gets to medical emergencies before we do. When we have a duty crew staff in the station, we are staffing a station, almost always we are getting to the emergency before North Memorial does. Not 100% of the time, and I don't have, unfortunately, great data. We don't track when North gets there before us. When we do not have a duty crew or don't have personnel in the fire station, almost all the time North does get to the event before we do. So that duty crew and having our station staff really makes a huge impact on our ability to respond and get people on scene at a medical emergency quickly.
That's valuable. Thank you very much. And Cheryl, I'm about to go to you for another question, but just before that, one of the other noises that has been disruptive with the existing fire stations, because they were built at an earlier time, you actually need to back in and out of them. And so folks may be familiar with the really annoying backup beeps. And one thing that's important for folks who don't follow the evolution of fire department design and best practice operations is that a pull-through station is most effective. So that means when a fire truck returns to the station, the truck is actually pulling in forwards into the garage so that they're set up to immediately pull out to respond to a service. And so all of the site planning that we're doing, the sizing of the site and the building that we're looking at, even with the 2-story condition, is based on providing a pull-through. So there would no longer be those backup beeps that you may be familiar with both of the existing fire stations. Cheryl, over to you for the next question. And a reminder to folks, please keep your questions coming. As Sherry has noted, questions received, those before and those now, even if whether it's the ones we've addressed or ones we're not able to get to, the city will be providing a full response to all questions received. If you're looking for more information, go to the city's website for this project. But please, any questions that you have, please keep them coming because they will be responded to in writing if we're not able to get to them tonight. Cheryl.
Susan and Cheryl, actually, I'm going to jump in. I just saw another one about the lights and sirens, so I just wanted to catch that follow up quick.
Thank you.
And the person was asking, I thought it was firefighter discretion, but state law. They thought the state law required lights and sirens when emerging, otherwise not considered an emergency vehicle. As far as lights and sirens, we are required to use lights and sirens if we are violating basically any normal traffic law. So if we are going to exceed the speed limit, if we are going to go through a stop sign without coming to a complete stop, if we are going to go through a red traffic light without coming to a complete stop, in those instances, we are legally required to use our lights and sirens. If we are not exceeding the speed limit, not going through traffic control devices against the state regulations, then it is more at discretion as to whether or not we are using lights and sirens.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much for picking that up. Cheryl, I know we perhaps had some additional questions under the category of neighborhood impact. We've covered training, noise, parking. Are there others that you might have in this category or any others that you think are useful to cover at this time?
We have no other questions in that category, and I think you've covered most of the portions of those questions. And as I move up into this is the biggest section that we had questions on, and a lot of multi-question questions. I was going to ask the panelists to please, if you could, while I'm going through these, scroll through the questions in the Q&A to make sure we haven't missed any. So we have most of these questions are related to what commercial properties have been looked at or not looked at, green space and things like that. And so just bear with me while I go through them. We've had one or two other questions about this, but people would like BKV to put dollar amounts on the scoring matrices if we can, and if we can't, to explain why.
I'm wondering,
Okay.
Cheryl, if you could maybe repeat that. I heard you say that they're looking for us to put down amounts. I'm wondering if that
like
relates...
adding on the scoring matrix, like amounts, dollar amounts.
Yeah. And this is something I tried to address with the conversation about how we have not yet engaged an appraiser or a real estate expert in this process, because we don't think we are there yet. But with that said, it may be helpful for both Susan and or Craig to explain what we do know, how we got to where we're at.
Yeah, I think it's important, and Craig, I'm about to toss this over to you. Important to note, and Sherry, as you say, our team has information that allows us to provide relative cost information at this point. Specific property cost and comps would be a part of a review of short lists. But Craig, maybe staying at a very high level, you could, because you were the one who ran our analysis, you might be able to talk about that high level comparative cost information that was used to determine those scoring numbers for sites.
You know, one thing I can add too is if someone were to ask us for these, they're not something that exists at the level that people are asking yet. And you're on mute, Craig.
Yes, you're on mute.
Things. You know, how do you know I wasn't saying something profound? Thank you for that a heads up. Cost is an important component of the analysis because the city's resources are finite, and even when this project is kind of distributed over all of the residents, there's still an impact. And you know, the amount of money that gets spent on this impacts the amount of money the city has to spend on other programs and activities and capital projects and so forth. You know, the cost to acquire the property at this point in time it's pretty ballpark. You know, it's a little bit of an order of magnitude, and you know what we've got basically is 1 point is equivalent to $100,000 of acquisition cost, except that you know we're starting off assuming that $800,000 is the bare minimum that the city would have to spend. So so you can add, you know, if you look at the point values in the matrix and you add 8 and you multiply by 1,000, that's the acquisition cost. You know, but those numbers come from from a couple different places, and as we mentioned, it's very rudimentary at this point in time. It's an order of magnitude. The cost of residential properties is just based on Zillow. You know, Zillow is not a perfect solution, but it provides us a level of magnitude for how much a different properties cost. And you know, what Zillow does is essentially they look at what the previous sale price was, and they increase or decrease based on the overall housing market in the area. So it's a pretty crude metric. But, you know, what real estate agents would tell us is that the Zillow Zestimate, whatever they call it, is probably typically a little bit on the high side. Not universally. There are some properties that there have been some significant investments made. You know, maybe somebody redid the kitchen or put a new roof on or something, and that's not reflected in the Zillow estimate. But by and large, that's a reliable metric, the level of analysis that we're doing at this point. For commercial properties, we had a commercial real estate agent run some comps and look at, you know, for open land, they looked at comps on open land in the Golden Valley area for various types of businesses, whether it's an office building or a retail property or what have you. They specifically ran comps to similar facilities that were recently sold. That they could compare these potential properties to, in terms of, you know, if it's an office building, how many square feet, you know, is it a Class A, is it a Class C, you know, and you know what the return on investment would be for whoever was trying to acquire that property. It gets pretty complicated, but the comps are, again, a good order of magnitude that we can plug into our equations, and then ultimately, as we begin to narrow down the list of candidate sites, and the city council gives direction about which sites should really be under consideration, the city would look at hiring a firm that specializes in this. You know, do appraisals of the property to kind of narrow down the actual market value of that piece of property, and then we would that same group would also look at the cost of relocating the existing homeowners or businesses and what impact that would be. The cost of relocation is not in the matrix right now. You know, the input we've gotten on cost to move a single family home is somewhere between, you know, $2,500 and $5,000, which, you know, frankly seems a little bit high to me. It seems like it's probably a little bit more expensive, and maybe the numbers we've gotten have just been a little bit out of date. But the cost to relocate a business can vary greatly. You know, if it's an insurance office that's relatively straightforward, it's probably pretty quick and inexpensive to move. If it's a dentist's office or you know, a cosmetic surgery suite in a medical office building, those are going to be very expensive to relocate those businesses. So we don't have a great metric for those. Those are not in in these line items right now. That's something that would need to be added as a point of consideration once we kind of narrow things down a little bit further.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. It's also, as you're noting, some tools have been used to allow that comparative cost analysis at this point. As Sherry noted, that deeper level, and as you mentioned, true evaluation by a real estate professional would be part of the deeper evaluation of potential shortlist sites. And that would also include that more accurate response of relocation costs. One thing I'd like to note about costs before I move on to two of the other items you mentioned, Cheryl, from questions, are that at this stage, one of the components that becomes really valuable is that as we look at a potential commercial site or a potential residential site, as you folks may have seen in the list that was provided as part of the data request, also shared on boards at the in-person open houses, to achieve the size of a site necessary for the fire department, in many cases, we are looking at acquisition of more than one property. That's both commercial and residential. And so this relative cost to acquire really varies also distinctly with whether the geometry of the site, the way a road curves, can you place a fire station in as small a number of parcels as possible? That's cheaper if you're buying one or two. Cost increases with the total number that you may need to achieve. Folks have asked questions, some content that's been received and shared previously in the areas that are being reviewed, whether it's commercial or residential. Some of our colored maps have shown all of the many parcels that could be subject to review. The fire department is not looking to take over an entire block, specifically in residential areas. It would always be some combination of parcels. So I wanted to address that from a cost standpoint. Cheryl, you'd mentioned two other things, which is looking at utilization of green space and which commercial properties have been considered. That content is available on the website. We would be listing a lot of them right now. One thing to note, and I'll take us back to our map, which is that commercial properties at all three main east-west roads have been reviewed as part of this process. Those that exist both east of Highway 100, those that exist west of Highway 100. Again, the starting point for the team's analysis was to look at those parcels that either on their own have sufficient footprint capacity to accommodate the fire station, or in combination with adjacent other commercial properties could provide the sufficient square footage. So those maps in detail are ones that we have provided elsewhere. The itemization of the commercial properties studied to date has been a part of the data request, so that information is available. And then as Sherry has noted, there's additional content being shared on the 14th. As I had said earlier in this presentation, we've been asked to review a few additional sites, new sites, not previously analyzed. And so those are also being added to the consideration. So to throw out a couple of names of things that people are probably thinking about and talking about, MnDOT is one of those that has been analyzed. Springgate Mall is one of those that has been analyzed. Residio is one of those that has been analyzed. So the team, again, is looking in each of these three zones, and that full information is something that is currently available on the website. Relative to green space, the City Council gave direction to our team that as we started this process, that specifically Scheid Park should be excluded from consideration. We understand that it was explored earlier in response to the 2016 study. That has been, per City Council direction, excluded from analysis at this time. It would be the council's direction if they elected to have us explore that. The city's goal, if they were to look at any green space, would be to provide new or additional park space, ideally closely in that area. The goal is to always to continue to protect amenities that exist for residents, but at this point, no green spaces have been analyzed, and that was per the direction the team has received to date. We have heard that as residents consider whether a commercial site or a residential site is utilized, some residents have preferences to, they've asked whether or not it's possible to build in a green space if that meant you could protect a residential property. So different perspectives being considered. At this point, no green spaces have been analyzed. I want to note that we are just about at 7:34. We have about 30 minutes left. We have a lot of questions. We're looking forward to continuing to answer them. Please continue to fill in the Q&A and know also that we will be responding in writing. Cheryl, some additional notes that you might have or could build on from the current conversation.
Right. Some of the specific businesses stated here you already mentioned. So here are a couple others, and I will repeat the ones that are also mentioned in here that you mentioned. Why is States Electric not a top contender? Why is the ball field at Shopper Park not a higher consideration? Who has spoken to the new MnDOT commissioner about a joint use of their space? Why isn't Feist with a small portion of Springgate parking lot a top contender? And then another mention of the homeowner at 5701 Glenwood who is selling their home. Why is Residio deemed too expensive, and who has talked to them about portioning some of their parking lot for the station and public works? It's only 30 seconds to reach Highway 100. Why didn't BKV, and okay, this next section, I'll read it, but I think these were answered earlier. Why didn't BKV include marginal response times above and below 4 minutes in their analysis? I think that was answered earlier. They admitted 2 stations cannot cover all of GV, so their analysis is incomplete. Why does the station need 30 parking spots when it's rare all personnel are on site at once? Less parking, less acres required. Then there are 2 questions about the area at Douglas and Duluth. Why was proposed site at Douglas and Duluth discounted due to response time when it is only 1 to 2 blocks further from Highway 100 than other sites along Duluth Street? How can that minimal added distance require relocating the downtown station? And then another question that's similar, Duluth Street between Highway 100 and Douglas Avenue is already a busy stretch of road with the many businesses such as Byerly's, Walgreens, King of Grace Lutheran Church, and Residio. Traffic, particularly around Byerly's during rush hour when it's more likely emergency vehicles would be needed, is especially congested and problematic. If response time and fast, easy access to Highway 100 is one of the leading criteria for site selection, this stretch of Duluth Street seems counterintuitive. So that's one chunk that's kind of related to businesses. And then
that might be nice if we could start there, because you've covered a lot, and I think we'll touch on a few, and if that's all right. Craig, I'm going to go to you in just a moment, specifically as it relates to Residio, the 30-second time to Highway 100, and exploration at Douglas and Duluth. I'm going to speak briefly to MnDOT. So the City of Golden Valley has been in communication with MnDOT since even well before the 2016 study. As you folks will also hear during the City Council, the city engineer is renewing dialogue with MnDOT. The most recent time the city had spoken with them previously was as part of the municipal planning study. Now here in 2023, the city engineer has reached out to MnDOT. Their initial response as of this current outreach is that they are not interested in relocation, that they have plans for this site and for its expansion, but they did indicate that they are going to continue to discuss it internally with their groups and departments and follow up more fully with the city engineer. So I think the appropriate way to kind of reference MnDOT at this point is that there's both a history of dialogue with MnDOT, and there is now currently active dialogue specifically in response to the input that's been received. So that's one point. Craig, over to you though, as it relates specifically to the kind of west of Highway 100 and Duluth Street and Residio.
So we outlined a, kind of a quarter mile on either side of Highway 100 as our primary zone where we were looking, which was based on kind of a logical analysis of the map. But as we use the software, and the software that we used for this analysis is called ArcGIS. It's sort of the the gold standard of GIS softwares. It's used by everybody, and it's a pretty robust methodology. As we look at the results from ArcGIS, what we see indicated is that there's when we place a station at Duluth and Douglas, it doesn't really do us that much good. The majority of the overlap, or the majority of the response area from that station overlaps areas that are already covered by the downtown station. It's not 100% overlap, but really there's a hugely significant overlap, and the same is true for properties up and down Douglas Drive. And of course Douglas Drive doesn't really pass Highway 55, but kind of that same area. Once the further west we get, the less of the overall square mileage of the city this new station will cover, the fewer of the historic calls this new facility would have covered. There's just more overlap with what's being covered by the downtown station within that 4-minute drive times. Specifically, with Duluth Street, it was one of the worst performing sites that we analyzed, from a percentage of the city covered to the percentage of historic calls that it could cover. And I think that the distance between Douglas and Highway 100 is very close to a half a mile. That takes the better part of a minute to travel. Even if the fire station on the Resideo site could control the traffic light at Duluth and Douglas and stop car movement in all directions and be free to cross that intersection. And if you notice how apparatus responds, they never really trust that there's not oncoming traffic, because when they do that, that's when they get in accidents. But even if they could just blaze across that intersection, it's still going to take the better part of a minute to get to Highway 100. And then, once if you're going to the northeast corner of town, then you have to get past Highway 100 and start heading north. If you're going down to the south edge of town, you have to obviously take Highway 100 and get down to 55 or Glenwood. So that, that extra time that it takes to get from Douglas over to Highway 100, while it's insignificant in our daily lives in terms of we're running to the grocery store or we need to get gas or what have you, it has a real impact on outcomes for the fire service. So we're relying on the software to calculate these numbers for us. The software has been proven reliable and is used by communities all over the world to do this exact same thing. I think that the other component to this is, while we talked about the cost being kind of an order of magnitude, and the specificity of exactly the number of calls that you will get to within 4 minutes, or exactly the area of town you can get to within 4 minutes, will fluctuate a little bit too. Weather conditions affect drive times, traffic conditions affect drive times, who's driving the vehicles affect drive times, kind of the random components about other drivers' behavior and whether or not you're approaching a light that would normally be green or whether you're approaching a light that would normally be red affects drive times. There's so much variability there. We're relying on the data to provide us a great placeholder for this, for these numbers. Over the next 70 years, we can be confident that the data this stuff provides will be a great average. Over any individual response, we might be able to get an extra 2 blocks than this shows. We might be 2 blocks short of what this shows. So this is looking at over a very long period of time. It's averaging traffic conditions over a full week worth of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. At 8 in the morning, noon, 5 at night, midnight. I mean, it basically averages every 5 minutes over the course of that 7-day period. So it's trying to take into consideration all of the data that it can when it does these analysis. So our recommendation to the city has been to trust the data that this GIS system is outputting.
Thank you, Craig. Very, very helpful in explaining why a potential experience of driving from Douglas to Highway 100, can it be done in under 30 seconds? Well, it depends on who you are. It's important for our process that we're using that average 7-day analysis. I'm going to have you comment on both States Electric and the ball field at Shopper Park, but I'm going to spend just a moment here. There was a question and a concern about Springgate Mall and the existing volume of traffic that exists there and the pressures that might be faced if a fire station was added into this area. We are at a specific point in analysis right now. When we would get to a level of a short list at the direction of City Council, work at that time, we've mentioned a little bit about that level of detail that would be pursued for understanding costs in a more detailed way. Things like a more detailed traffic analysis would be included. So if this was a site that was carried forward, even there have also been concerns expressed about the traffic along Golden Valley Road on the east side of Highway 100, how that can be already dangerous and what does it mean to add fire service there. So regardless of locations, part of that next level consideration of the shortlisted items is to look at all of the aspects of potential impact in a greater level of detail. That's utilizing additional resources, potentially utilizing additional consultants. So we appreciate that kind of caution and flag on those. Craig, wondering if we can come back to those two questions about States Electric and the ball field at Shopper Park.
Frankly, we have not explored in depth the ball field at Shopper Park. We were asked to exclude Scheid Park from our analysis. To this juncture, we've kind of excluded Shopper Park from the analysis as well. Certainly, the finger of Shopper Park that extends adjacent to the pond towards Highway 55 isn't big enough, but the area where we have ball fields is probably large enough and flat enough to put a fire station. My suspicion is that, and it'll be fairly straightforward for us to run that analysis. So I'll go ahead and do that. My suspicion is that it's just far enough away from Highway 55 that the response times are going to be a poor performer. We don't have a cutoff value with regards to what sites are really under consideration from a response time standpoint. We didn't say, if the downtown station can get to 60% of the historic calls, whatever future location for Station 2 has to get to at least 70%, combined with the two of them. That would mean that Station 2 only has to respond to 10% of the calls in town, and Station 1 would be responding to 60% of the calls in town. We didn't provide that cutoff. But I would say if we're not getting close to, if we're not getting above 80% with the total historic call volume that can be covered between the two, it's probably not worth the city's effort to put a station there. And again, we haven't made that exclusion, but that provides a good metric for people to interpret the data and what's probably going to be considered appropriate. It's been mentioned in the chats or Q&A or whatever, the goal that NFPA sets forward is that you can get to 90% of your calls within 4 minutes of drive time. And the reality is that we're probably not going to quite get there. It's probably, going to a 2-station model is going to leave us just a little bit short. Now, we can get to, a large portion of the city within 4 minutes. We can get to basically all of the city within 5 minutes, but we're probably going to be, just a little bit short on that difficult yet achievable goal is kind of how they set it for 4 minutes of drive time to 90% of your events. And again, this is where the software versus the fire department kind of plays into consideration. If the fire department knows that an address is at the far end of their 4-minute drive time, or it's a little bit farther away and it's a serious call, there's a working fire or cardiac arrest, or there's a stroke or vehicle accident with injuries, they're going to press the accelerator a little bit harder, and they're going to get a little bit farther within that 4-minute period. That's just human nature. And although they're trained to obey the speed limits, because that's the speed that the roads are designed for and the stopping distance are designed for, of any vehicles that might be approaching the road and so on and so forth. They're gonna press their accelerator a little bit harder, and they're gonna get there a little bit faster. So that's not to say that these maps are wholesale incorrect, or we need to increase the areas by another 2 or 3 blocks. It's just to say that the fire department values timeliness in their response, and they're going to go as quickly as is safe. But generally speaking, it's unlikely that the fire department will, over the long run, achieve that 90% threshold. But again, that depends on overall patterns of development over the next 70 years, and where calls come in over the next 70 years versus where the calls are occurring now, and we can get pretty close with 2 stations. Sorry, Susan, I feel like I went off on a lot of a tangent there.
You did, and we could all listen to you all night long. We do have about 10 minutes left. This was designed to go to 8 o'clock. I think our team is willing to maybe stay on a little bit after that. So Cheryl, I'm going to have you tee up what might be, and these have all been packaged questions. So you're about to ask your kind of last packaged questions so we can answer a few of these. But Bethany, I wanted to go to you for just a moment as we're on this topic of response time. So we've all spoken about how before Golden Valley instituted having any staff specifically on shift at a station, that your response time was always the travel time to the station for folks to gear up and get on equipment, and then the travel time from the station to an incident. Within the last, I believe it's about 1.5 years now, time is flying fast. Can you just describe for us very briefly about how having even a limited number of shift workers has impacted your response time?
Absolutely. We have had multiple incidents in the last year where, when we've had personnel on shift at a station, we have had saves from cardiac arrests. We have been there to help immediately after the delivery of a baby, before paramedics were able to get there. We have been able to go to a garage fire where we're able to get there very quickly and stop that fire from destroying an entire garage. Just this afternoon, just a few hours ago, we were called to a business here in the city that had a battery fire, that we were able to get there quickly, stop the fire from spreading anywhere within the building and doing further damage to that business. So we're seeing it making a difference. That 4 to 9 minutes, really, that we can have up to 9 minutes that our firefighters can live from our stations, makes a huge difference in the medical calls and even the small fires. I've heard some of the chatter about that. We've been very fortunate. We have very few number of fires. In the last year, we've actually have not had a single fully involved structure fire, meaning a house or an apartment building. But we have had incidents in other buildings. We've had 3, I believe, in the last year now, smaller kitchen fires in apartment buildings where sprinklers were able to put it out, thank goodness, and being able to get there to help get the water off sooner so there's less water damage. Those aren't major fires, but our quick response makes a big difference to help stop fires sooner, to stop the little fires from turning into big fires, and to make a difference on some of these medical emergencies. I don't have the data that our chief would have in front of him to tell exactly how much faster our response time has been since instituting duty crews, but there's been at least a couple of minutes overall typically that we are getting on scene faster by not having our firefighters having to come from home to the station and just having those firefighters ready to go at the station.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I think that's important as we contextualize the work. For you as residents observing this process, there's site selection criteria, there's response time mapping. All of these are preliminary tools that fuel the dialogue and the decision-making that needs to happen. Ultimately, all of this is in service of that operational transition that we're talking about. And as the assistant chief has noted, we could look at a map that says, well, you can't reach all of the city within 4 minutes, so why bother? But actually, the operational transition is buying you time, because previously, and I think our physical boards from the open houses that are also available on the website noted that in this time period, first on scene went from, and I'm not going to give you the seconds, but it went from about 9 minutes and it's now about 6 minutes, right? So that's a 3-minute difference. And so already you're improving your time from today's service. So thank you very much for that. Craig, it looked like you were going to chime in, but given timing, I'm going to go to Cheryl for some additional questions, if that's all right. Cheryl, do we have a set that might be useful to round out dialogue tonight? And a reminder for folks, if you have questions we haven't gotten to, I hope they're in the Q&A. If they're not, please put them there and they will be a part of our printed responses. Thank you.
So we have a second group of questions related to location, and then we did have a few questions related to staff qualifications. And so I'll start with the second set of location questions. We live on Adair Avenue North, next to the location where you propose to take over 5 properties on our block and disrupt this entire neighborhood when your initial location would not have taken homes from your constituents. What I don't understand is why the location downtown can't be combined with one of the other 2 locations and leave the third one where it's at. Put the combined location at Site 27 at the intersection of 55 and Douglas, and you have no need to uproot families in our community. Another question, the survey seems slanted toward the Scheid area location. Why wasn't there a question asking if you were willing to give up your home for a new station? Next, why are green spaces or residential homes being considered in a city that has ample commercial properties? Next, 1920 Toledo Avenue North isn't in any of the site configurations, but all of the homes around it are in multiple configurations. Please explain exactly what exempts that property from consideration. For example, what law, statute, variance, or person, etc. And then I have heard one of the reasons to have a fire station on the east side of the river is due to the potential for the Highway 100 bridge to collapse. A legitimate study should not be allowed to take that into account, as statistically speaking, the likelihood of that is extremely small. In addition, other facilities would be able to assist in such a case, and there are other bridges. Far-fetched scenarios should not be considered heavily, especially when it could lead to displacing citizens.
So that's a great set, and I think you've covered, again, a lot of items for us to cover. We've talked about potential location of either a ideally located central station, more effectively working with the downtown station, the 55 and Douglas area, residential versus commercial versus green space, which I believe we touched on. You may have seen me respond, as you noted, the question about the Highway 100 bridge collapse. That's the first that I'm hearing of that, so I can say that that has not been a part of this consideration. When projects such as this happen, I know that there's oftentimes a lot of information that's moving around. This station analysis is distinctly focused on providing complementary coverage, response time coverage to the downtown station, as Craig has noted, through that GIS analysis. At this point, there has been no severe emergency scenario exploration. If that was to be a part of considerations, it would only be a part of a review of specific sites rather than overall within the city. We're really looking at day-to-day services. But Craig, I'm going to go to you for that question about whether or not this could be a one-station model and whether or not there's a more effective location centralized within the city.
We did do a bunch of exploration about that because, you know, while it was covered in 2016 and eliminated at that point in time, we wanted to do our due diligence on that as well. And you know, the best performing option for percentage of historic calls as well as the land area still leaves massive coverage gaps in large portions of the city where the fire department can't get there within 7 or 8 minutes, much less 4 or 5 minutes. And you know, a single station just can't get everywhere within the time goals. You know, I think the goal of balancing, you know, where the downtown, balancing response from the downtown station is important. We didn't look at a bridge collapse on Highway 100, but we did look at, you know, the impact of response times on, you know, when Highway 100 is completely gridlocked. Because the chief was concerned about that early on in the process, since that's a major north-south corridor. You know, the only other ones, you know, I suppose you could sneak back around through Lilac or go up and down Douglas, which is probably at the, you know, would add a significant period of time, and then or you could go through Theodore Wirth Parkway through the park. You know, what the data showed when we did that analysis was that, you know, in those time periods when the highways are basically off limits, you know, due to traffic, and the same thing would apply if there was a bridge outage, you know, it matters very little, you know, where on the east side of town your station is located. You know, all of the options are going to be, you know, are going to be challenged from a response time perspective, but they all end up to be challenged from the same amount, if that makes sense.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Craig. There was embedded in your questions, Cheryl, some questions about why consideration of residential properties, there are sufficient commercial properties and otherwise. Again, as we've mentioned tonight, this process has reviewed both commercial and residential properties. The next step for this process is another dialogue with the City Council. That's happening on February 14th. That's an opportunity for them to provide some direction, additional direction to the team for what steps happen next. That may include, as you've already heard, additional sites for consideration and other direction that allows us to continue moving forwards. Relative to the green space, again, we touched on this a little bit earlier, because there was a specific direction from council to exclude Scheid Park. The only other green space of scale that could potentially be utilized within our zone of development, I believe, is Shopper Park. And Craig, as you noted, that's something that we simply have not been directed to analyze at this point. It is something that we have the potential to do so once directed, but right now the focus has been on both commercial and residential properties, each explored in their own ways at each of these key intersections, Duluth, Highway 55, and Glenwood Avenue. I believe
one of the questions.
Yes.
Can I kind of jump in? One of the questions that Cheryl asked was about, you know, we've talked a lot about which intersections are the best for response times and so on and so forth, but we've also gotten into some depth for some combinations of parcels. That process has not yet been exhaustive. So while you know, you guys noted that there was a parcel on Adair, I think it was, where adjacent properties have all been listed as something that's been explored, but that one parcel hasn't been. or Toledo. That's a little bit of a random artifact. There's no of the properties that are within the zone of consideration, which we've tried to highlight through some of the maps that we've released. There's no intention to exclude or specifically target any of those properties at this point in time. The extent what we've done is we've looked at some combinations of parcels so far for relative costs, relative size, how construction might be completed there in terms of whether it would have to be 1 story or 2 stories, but that has not been exhaustive. It's that parcel is listed as a parcel under consideration probably because it is truly under consideration, but the list that we produced for the information request is specific to the parcels that have been included in specific combinations, while it's potentially misleading to release that information and make people think, and it might make people think that those are the only sites that are in consideration. The reality is we're just trying to be transparent and comply with the data request. I don't know that there's many of the sites around there that have been formally excluded, and there certainly has been no sites that have been formally indicated as, this is exactly where it needs to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Craig. And I think important to note, as folks may have seen a larger site matrix and analysis as part of the data request, even those sites that, at least in the 2 rounds of analysis, there were more that were ranked highly in the, or they were ranked in the first round and were eliminated for one reason or another in the second round. All of those are still, quote, on the table. So City Council could direct the team to continue to consider or explore things in more detail, and that's part of our next step process. As we near a close, I wanted to respond, Cheryl. There was a component of your question that talked about the survey, which is currently open through the 21st, and want to note that that's a short 5-minute survey. It is specifically designed to build on the open houses that we've had both now and in October. In October, we had opened up a consideration of site criteria to the community. This survey right now is intended to help us at this stage of the process, which is to garner resident input that can help provide direction to the City Council as they consider which potential sites to explore for a short list. So it is a comparative survey. It's asking questions about what should be prioritized when we're considering potential options of site A versus site B. And so it's structured in that way to support this next stage of discernment that the council will move through. I want to thank folks for coming tonight, for whatever duration you've participated with us. We appreciate this. We welcome all the questions that you have. A reminder that on Tuesday, the 14th, there's another City Council workshop. Again, that's a format where the public is invited to attend either in person or digitally. In the workshop format, there's no opportunity for a public forum. The focus is on the council, specifically continuing to consider and explore and respond to the information that the team has continued to provide. Again, all of the questions received tonight will be responded to in print. We're really appreciative. Cheryl, I'm going to go back to you to see if there's maybe one question. You've been looking at all of the lists all night long. Is there one that might be useful to end with tonight?
Yes. As I mentioned before, there were 3 questions related to qualifications. And so in summary, they all want to know what was the selection process for choosing BKV to do this study? Did the city consider more than one company? And why did we choose BKV? They're concerned there may be a bias in their recommendations and would ask to get a second opinion from another agency. They would like to know who on staff was involved with the consulting firm to develop the site criteria. Was there citizen involvement? And then for people new to this project and BKV, they would like and I think they mean the residents who are new to this. They would like people to please state their names, job titles, and years of experience, number of projects, selecting locations for a fire station. How many projects, percentage of the time did the project result in the use of eminent domain against homeowners? And, perhaps that would be a good way to end by talking about experience and, again, reminding everybody who everyone is.
Yes, thank you. And I am going to note Cheryl, and for folks who've been attending, so Cheryl Wheeler is Director of Communications for the City of Golden Valley. Sherry was with us earlier and is our project touch point. She had to leave the conversation, so I do want to acknowledge, and Cheryl, I might be able to tap you for the question about how BKV was selected. I think it'd be more appropriate to come from the city, and that may be one that's that we hold and respond to in print and in writing. My name is Susan Morgan. I've been a practicing architect for, goodness gracious, just about 18 years now. The time flies very fast. My specific involvement in this project is carrying forwards from the municipal facilities study. So that's my area of expertise, and I focus specifically on community engagement and sustainability. So my involvement in this project has been limited in those ways, but we are led here by Craig Carter.
Thank you. My name is Craig Carter. I am a partner and architect with BKV Group. I've been with BKV for about 12 years and have somewhere close to 18 years of experience, just like Susan. The vast majority of my career has been spent working on public safety facilities, mostly fire, but a lot of police work in there as well. And I've worked on over 100 fire projects over the course of my career. Probably, I admit that I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but probably around 10 or 12 that are specific to site selection processes. None of those, to my knowledge, ended up using eminent domain to acquire property. But there's a lot of nuance to the answer to that question. There are plenty of site selection projects that are less complex than the Golden Valley project. And, some of them have been, targeting, which farm field should we purchase so that we, in 30 years will be best positioned to put a fire station. Some of them have been, really about, where can we put a project that's in an industrial area, need to stay in an industrial area, but exactly where does it need to go? Some of them have been about, we need to go into this this residential area, but the property owners, for whatever reason, have been able to reach a settlement with the city. Maybe they just, we're looking to move within the next couple of years anyway. So it certainly doesn't always end up that way. And I think that there's a lot of hope probably that this one won't have to enter into that process as well. It's not something that anybody does lightly.
Thank you very much. And again, I think it would be most appropriate for city staff to respond to selection of BKV Group. What I will note is that our project has involved a range of city staff as part of the core working group that includes folks from communications, folks from the fire department, and others. And so the project representation, the voices have tied together city expertise. And our goal is to continue to serve the city and the projects to the best ability that we can. I know that there was a question and concern about bias, and a question and a note about whether or not a second opinion should be considered. That's information that will be passed along to City Council, and should they elect to take action on either of those concerns, they can. Again, our goal, and Craig, as you noted, your experience nationwide with fire stations, we're providing both benchmark information from projects across the country and across the state of Minnesota. But our specific focus and our understanding is that every station and every department is unique, and we seek in every project to use both stakeholder and community engagement to feed into the recommendations that we develop. And particularly within Golden Valley, it's been a great partnership of having community engagement a part of this effort, starting from the municipal facility study all the way through this one. So that's maybe as much. And Cheryl, if you feel comfortable chiming in any way to some of those other parts of that question, please do so.
Yeah, I know it's been a while, and I've been involved in the process secondarily, and it was led by our physical development director, whom you may or may not know, left us in December to become the city administrator in Shorewood. And so we did have an extensive process for selection. I know there's a matrix and a spreadsheet somewhere, so I will find that, and we will provide the answer to that question with all of the written answers that will be provided later. And then I also want to just remind everybody that this recording will be available for people to review on the website, and that's where we'll post all the questions and answers from both the Q&A here. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of the questions, but we will answer them all. And then the questions that were received by email beforehand.
Excellent, thank you. So thank you to all. We still have some folks still hanging on. Thank you for listening with us throughout this. Please share the information and the links with your neighbors and folks that you work with. Again, the next step in this process is the City Council workshop on February 14th. And from there, the team should be receiving information about and direction about next steps. So thank you very much for your participation this evening. We very much appreciate it. And a reminder that information about this project is available on the city website. That includes past presentations, additional background information, and contact if you want to reach out for additional questions. So thank you very much. And I think that's it. Thank you to our panelists tonight, Assistant Chief Bethany Brunsnell, Craig Carter, and thanks to all. Wishing you a very wonderful evening. Thank you.